Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The clocks have been turned back, the days are shorter, and a new yet familiar sheriff is coming back to our nation. Should I even go there? Let me just stay right here as I focus in on all that's happening in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with Joe's JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And as we approach a Week 10 starting tonight in Baltimore between the Bengals and Ravens, which I'll talk about as well as the rest of the schedule, but it's weird. This normally would be the halfway point, but then again, there have been a lot of teams that haven't even surpassed the halfway point. But because of the 17-game season, which I've belabored time after time after time over the years, how stupid it is, but of course it's all about the almighty dollar when it comes to greed in the NFL, and I talked about that ad nauseum. But with a lot of teams that have played 9 games, and just about all, in fact, every team has played at least 8, we have, in essence, let's just say that we're about to pass the halfway point once we get past this week, and now we can look forward to a second half with a lot of teams looking to jockey for position, looking to try to stake their claim to qualify for the postseason, and that's what the trade deadline did this past Tuesday for a handful of teams. The first one in particular are the Washington Commanders. As I talked about on Monday, there were a lot of players and some murmurs throughout the sport where you heard players wanting to go to Washington right at the deadline, considering what they've done this year. Obviously, with the rookie sensation Jaden Daniels and the head coach Dan Quinn, who's getting his second crack after what we saw there in Atlanta, coming this close to winning a Super Bowl, as we know, several years ago against the New England Patriots. And with the culture in Washington, now the dark cloud being uplifted from Daniel Snyder and him being exited, and who knows where he is on this day. But nobody cares about that. Everybody cares about what's going on in Washington right now. And with them bringing in Marshawn Lattimore from the Saints, defensive back, a guy who could certainly just plug in and be a fixture for that secondary as the Commanders try to continue this magic carpet ride of a season, hopefully for them with an NFC East title and a home game in their building, and then we'll see what happens from there. But they made a big move as far as their defense goes. And speaking of which, the same can be said for the Detroit Lions. We know about Aiden Hutchinson not going to play, at least so we think, for the rest of this year. So they bring in Zadarius Smith, the pass rusher from the Browns, which will be an upgrade. Now, don't expect him to be anything close to what Hutchinson will be as far as him being the anchor of that defensive line. But he certainly does bring a lot of pass rushing experience and will certainly be a boost to that Lion defense. And then, speaking of which, another pass rusher goes, in this case, from Green Bay to the Pittsburgh Steelers in a one, Preston Smith, as well as Mike Williams, the wide receiver, formerly the Jets, now in Pittsburgh, as they try to stake their claim, not only in the AFC North, but one of the teams in the muddled top of the playoff picture for the AFC, because, of course, you have Kansas City, you have Buffalo, and with the Steelers trying to also plant their flag to be one of the teams that possibly could make a deep playoff season run, and considering with the quarterback, Russell Wilson, and how he's played here over the last couple of games. Now, granted, it's a small sample size, but now let's see what he's going to do as the Steelers will go to Washington this week and a very decent schedule. That I must admit. So we'll touch on the schedule in a minute, but as far as what these trades have done, even the Arizona Cardinals, they also bring in a pass rusher too in their own right from the Denver Broncos. Baron Browning, let's see what he's going to do as far as maybe make an impact on that Cardinal defense, who's currently 5-4 and at the very top of the NFC West. And then you have a big giant question mark, and I just got to throw this in because when this trade went down, knowing the health of Dak Prescott, and I'll get to that in a second, but the Cowboys bring in Jonathan Mingo, a wide receiver from the Carolina Panthers. Who? What? So they trade for him, and granted that CeeDee Lamb has been hurt, although I think he may play in the big game on Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles, but he is nursing that shoulder injury, so who knows how that's going to affect him, not only in the short term, but the long term. But by bringing in Mingo, they figure that, hey, another target for a Cowboy quarterback, because Dak Prescott, who tore his hamstring there on Sunday against the Falcons, so bad that it pulled away from the bone, had to be put on IR. 4 games he's going to miss. He's not going to come back until they play, I believe, the Bengals there in early December. But considering the severity of the injury, who knows? It may even be longer. And with the Cowboys at 3-5, and I understand they're trying to be relevant, and with the game here, to me, it's their season. Playing Philadelphia, they have to win that game, and they haven't even played Washington yet. So the 4 games that they're going to play against Philly and Washington are going to be enormous for them to try to at least be relevant and be in any playoff picture, because if they lose those games, you can forget about it. And as it is, right now they're on the outside looking in, being 2 games under 500 of this playoff picture. And I understand it may be early. We still have, quote-unquote, half a season to go. But for Dallas to make that trade was puzzling, to say the least. And I understand it's a warm body. It's a guy that they could hopefully target, considering the health of CeeDee Lamb. But do you really expect Mingo to come in here and try to be a CeeDee Lamb light, even if he's compromised? I don't think so. And Jerry, he can't get out of his own way. Jones, that is, the owner. So if you're a Cowboy fan, I know you got to be just up in arms as to what the hell's going on down there, especially making this trade and I believe giving up a 4th-round draft pick in the process. So that's what you had the other day with the trade deadline. And what does that mean? Are these going to be deals that are going to put these teams over the top? Well, they're certainly going to be in contention, because Washington, unless they just flat out collapse, they're going to be in the race for the NFC East. Steelers the same for the AFC North. Obviously, the Lions, they look like to be the best team in the league, as I talked about on Monday's podcast. If you haven't listened to that, of course, you can go back in the archives and check that out. Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel, at JAYREELZ. But now as we take a look at this second half, and, well, I'll talk about the second half more on Monday's podcast, because now all the games and all the teams will have 9 games in the books. And as it is right now, with the way the schedule has been over the last few weeks, it has been rather bland. Nothing that you can really say, all right, now we have a week where we have 4 or 5 good games. And we understand that the NFL, they're trying to spread these games out to all these different networks, all these different streaming platforms, etc. As I've said again 1,000 times, but you have another game in Munich or overseas, which obviously Munich, Germany is overseas, but another International Series game. I believe it's the last one, so we don't have to worry about having games in London or Germany anymore, but it's a game that certainly you will not have to set your alarm. It's the Giants playing the Carolina Panthers. So that one, you think I'm going to be wrapped up in that? Especially here, living in New York with a local feel? Absolutely not. But starting tonight, Cincinnati and Baltimore, a lot of people will think that this is Cincinnati's last stand for the division. I'm not going to say that that's the case. Yes, they do need to win tonight because they've already lost to Baltimore earlier this year. So for the Bengals, who have been up and down this year, yes, it looked like they were going to come out of it as they won back-to-back games before losing here this past Sunday. And now that they have the Ravens having to go to Baltimore, is this a must-win? If it's for the division, yes. But for the playoffs, I think they're fine. They do have a bit of a soft part of their schedule forthcoming, although they still have 2 games with the Steelers. But considering the Bengals, I would think that they have to be in must-win mode. I'm sure they're going to go into this game tonight knowing that at 4-5, they have to get themselves back to 500. And with the Ravens at 6-3, at least they'll inch closer to a division and battling it out with both Baltimore and Pittsburgh. So I would think that the Bengals have to come out of this with a victory in any way, shape, or form. And not even just for the overall playoff picture. Because like I said, if they lose to the Ravens, they'll lose the tiebreaker to them if they happen to tie at the end of the year as far as their record goes. But really for the division, and granted with the 2 games ahead against the Steelers, I think they'd want to win this game overall. They want to get back in good graces, not only in that locker room, but of course with the fan base. And for the Bengals, knowing that, I'm not going to say this is do or die, but if I'm Joe Burrow and if I'm the coach Zach Taylor, I would go into this game with a do or die mindset. Because you don't want to have this loss here and then have to settle to play for a 5th, 6th, or 7th seed in the conference. No, you want to try to gun for the top. You want to get closer to get Baltimore at 6-4, where you'll be 5-5, and you worry about the Steelers down the road. And the Steelers schedule, as I talked about, is going to be a gauntlet starting this Sunday in Washington. So for the Bengals, I don't know if they're going to come out alive with this game tonight. They haven't played well in Baltimore over the last couple of years. In fact, they lost on a Thursday night there last year without Joe Burrow, I might add. But I would think they'll be competitive. And with the Ravens beating the Broncos there 41-10 on Sunday, and who knows if now they got their offense back on track, and the Bengal defense, again, they're not going to have anybody shaking in their boots, especially if you're the offensive coordinator, Todd Monken. But I can see this being a competitive game. This is going to have to be another game where Joe Burrow, he's had a couple of 5-touchdown passing games this season. He's probably going to need another one. And in fact, one of those 5-touchdown passing games was against the Ravens. And what happened? They lost. Granted that they had some terrible play calling with the overtime and not connecting on a field goal, which would have won the game. But I don't know. I think Baltimore's going to win this game. I would like to see the Bengals win this only because it puts some pressure on Baltimore down the road. And for some reason, I think Baltimore will come out victorious tonight, despite the fact that I'm sure Joe Burrow and company will be game and do their best to win this contest tonight. But as far as other big games on the schedule, as we take a look, Pittsburgh and Washington, that's one that a lot of people will circle in that 1 o'clock window. You do have a couple of others. San Francisco, Tampa, Buffalo at Indy, only because Indy's trying to stay afloat in the playoff picture, but Buffalo's been riding high here. Denver at Kansas City. Denver, after getting blown out there in Baltimore, how do they respond? They're in Arrowhead, and of course, Kansas City won the game on Monday night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know you had some clock management issues with Todd Bowles, no shock there. But the Chiefs 8-0, and I don't want to hear about them running the table 17-0. It's way too early to even talk about that. And granted that they win in all different types of ways, certainly it wasn't their defense because they gave up a late touchdown there to Baker Mayfield, and that's where the time management thing came in. But it didn't burn Todd Bowles at that time. But you knew that even when they came from behind to make it a one-point game at 24-23, they should have went for two there. They should have tried to go for the victory because, as you saw, they lost the coin flip, and you saw the expression from Baker Mayfield at midfield when they lost the coin toss. His head just went straight directly to the sky, knowing that the Chiefs were going to march on down the field, punch it in as they did with Kareem Hunt, and they won the game, and that was it. So, KC, let's see what Denver's going to do. That's usually a pretty, I don't want to say it's a big rivalry if you want to go back to the days of John Elway, but it's a series that Denver has played well, especially in Kansas City over the years. Not to say that they've been beating the Chiefs badly or beating them year in and year out at Arrowhead, but let's see. I don't think Denver's going to win there. I think it's going to be Kansas City. They're going to go 9-0, and that's another 1 o'clock game that a lot of people will look at as well. But to me, it's Pittsburgh-Washington. That's a big 1 o'clock game. Atlanta-New Orleans, forget about it. New Orleans is obviously out to sea. They're done. And with Dennis Allen being fired, I talked about that on Monday's podcast. I don't even know who the interim is. They didn't even announce. I'm sure they did announce an interim, but it wasn't that important because with the Saints going nowhere, they could have brought back Jim Mora from his days going back to the 90s, and nobody would have even noticed. So other games, New England and Chicago, So really, Minnesota, Jacksonville, I'm not going to even get into that. Your 4 o'clock windows, Tennessee and LA, Chargers that is. Philly, Dallas, big game as we know. More so for Dallas than it is for Philadelphia, as I mentioned. Jets in Arizona. Now, can the Jets, this is a game that I'm sure they're going to look at and say, oh, we could go in there and beat the Cardinals. And the Cardinals, they can be Jekyll and Hyde. But with them at 5-4 and knowing that the Jets are coming into town, maybe they could ground the Jets and keep their division lead in the NFC West, where the Jets obviously need wins in a hurry if they even want to be a part of the AFC playoff race. So you have that, and you have a very good Sunday night game with Detroit at Houston. Let's see if the Texans can bounce back. And the Texans, as we know, they're going to be one of those teams that they're going to have to win road games. Obviously, this game's at home in order to take them seriously. But coming off of that Jet disaster there last Thursday night and with a mini bye, let's see if that bodes well for the Texan franchise as the Lions come into town there for Sunday night. And your Monday night game is the Dolphins visiting the Rams in LA. Your bye teams, Cleveland, Green Bay, the Raiders, and Seattle. So teams that you're certainly not going to miss on the schedule. But you have some decent games there. not a great slate. We already know who the good games are. You have a good one tonight, that's for sure. And then you got Pittsburgh, Washington. You want to say Buffalo and Indy? Ugh, not me. Philly, Dallas, and Detroit, Houston. That is it. And come Monday, I will certainly unpack what the second half lies and how this first half of the NFL season certainly has not been one to write home about. And I'll just leave it at that. And I've been dying to even talk about that, but I want to get past this week 10. And even though I know you have Miami and the Rams, which both of those teams already have had their byes and will not have played their ninth game, but in essence will be past the halfway point. And I'll certainly uncover everything that has to do with the games there tonight, Sunday, as well as my first half recap and what the second half will be like. Now, as I keep the helmet and shoulder pads on, let me go to the college game where we had our first unveiling, which was a little bit of an okie doke on my part because I thought that the selection committee was going to discuss that on last Tuesday, but they did not do that. So let's break it down as we take a look at what we could see here with the rankings. And the two surprises that I come away with here, you have Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami. First things first, why is Ohio State ahead of Georgia is beyond me. And I didn't talk about this on my YouTube channel. I kind of breezed through it in one of my 1-minute shorts encapsulating what the selection show was all about. The other one is Miami, and I'm going to get to them in a second. But how is Georgia? And we know they have a gauntlet of a schedule, including a game at Ole Miss this week. And we saw with Georgia and what they've done. They played Clemson week 1. They blew them out. Had to go to Alabama. We saw what happened there. Had to go to Texas. Definitely saw what happened there. Played Tennessee. They've had a schedule which is just almost like playing a gauntlet of an NFL schedule. Because for the Bulldogs, and we get it, they've had their moments, especially with their quarterback Carson Beck. But to me, Georgia, you could argue whether or not they're the best team in the nation. Of course, that's not the case. You got to give it up to Oregon. But Georgia, to me, should be number 2 over Ohio State. And who knows, when it's all said and done, maybe that'll happen because of their strength of schedule. Of course, Ohio State playing in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is a joke this year. I don't want to hear about Penn State because of what happened there against the Buckeyes on Saturday. But Michigan, we understand that hangover and with Harbaugh gone and no quarterback, Michigan is a shell of what we saw last year. And yes, we could talk about the Wisconsins, the Minnesotas, the Iowas, but no, they do not. They pale in comparison to what Georgia's had to go through on their schedule. And granted, I get it, with Texas being a part of the SEC this year. And you could even say for the Big Ten, how USC, UCLA, Washington, etc. But there is no comparison as to the Big Ten and for the SEC. So to me, Georgia should be number 2. I get it that when it's all said and done, who knows? Maybe that will change. But that was, to me, one error that the committee got wrong. And then Miami being number 4. And I get it. They have a Heisman Trophy finalist, you would think, when it's all said and done, and a one Cam Ward. They've had a big year. I get it that the ACC is a conference that everybody's going to laugh at. You don't have big teams there. I understand you have Clemson there. But even still, Miami trying to reinvigorate the Hurricane brand and everything going back to the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s. But for Miami, and the only reason why they're ranked number 4 is because they have to put up the 4 conferences. So with Oregon, obviously in the Big Ten, Ohio State, I get it, they get Big Ten love too. But with Georgia SEC and then the ACC, you don't have a Big 12 presence there as of yet. But or even a Pac-12, because obviously Pac-12 is gone. So you think about Big 12. But for Miami to be 4th right now, and even though they are undefeated, you could argue whether or not Texas should be there, and even though Texas has a loss, but still, think about it. If that's the case, then Miami should be number 2 because they haven't lost a game. But we know that Ohio State and Georgia are better than Miami if they were to play on a neutral site right now. But you could argue whether or not Texas belongs there to a certain extent, even Penn State, maybe even Tennessee because of their SEC roots. But Miami, listen, they deserve it. They played well this year. I get it. Their schedule is garbage. But considering they have a quarterback there that's probably going to be one of the top 4 or 5 there for a Heisman Trophy. And Miami, let's see when it comes to the conference championship whether or not they'll come out and be one of the top 4 and maybe even a little bit higher. Maybe 3, maybe 2 when it's all said and done. I don't think they'll go that high, but Miami there, number 4, that's one you could question. From 5 on down, I know you can nitpick. You could talk about BYU maybe being a little bit higher because they're undefeated. Same for Indiana. And again, there's a big presence here with the Big Ten. So people can say, well, JAYREELZ, wait a minute. You killed the Big Ten, but you have Penn State there, you have Indiana there, and you have Ohio State there. Yes, we understand Ohio State's going to be there. Penn State, obviously they're going to be part of that mix there. And Indiana, let's see what happens when they go to Ohio State, whether or not they belong. And even if they do lose to Ohio State, who knows? They'll probably sneak in the back door as far as being one of the final 12. But how I look at it here is when you get past the top 4 and you have Texas, Penn State, Tennessee, Indy, BYU, Notre Dame, Alabama, Boise State. And Alabama's going to be interesting. They go to LSU Saturday night, which is going to be for all the marbles for both of those teams. That's going to be a loser leaves town match to where if Alabama wins, they're certainly going to be and probably earn a spot there considering they beat Georgia earlier this year and then LSU, so they will get that spot. And if LSU wins, that will knock out Alabama because Alabama will suffer their 3rd loss. Both of these teams already with 2 losses. And how I look at that game, I know Alabama's had trouble at LSU, and I'm sure LSU knows with it being in their stadium that this is it. They know if they lose, they're going to be out of the college football playoff mix. So that's why, and Alabama, we know that they've lost these games, whether it's at Vandy, Tennessee, and then now here in this juncture, another road game. I don't know if they're going to come out alive. So therefore, I'm going to say LSU wins, where we don't have to worry about Alabama when it comes to the playoffs. But with Boise State there at 12, and then LSU, Texas A&M, who is going to try to bounce back in their own right. So for this first iteration of the rankings and where these teams stack up, obviously there's going to be a change after this week. And we know about Alabama, Georgia going to Ole Miss. Ole Miss right now is currently ranked 16th, right behind LSU. And if Ole Miss wins, Georgia will still be a part of the mix, but they'll be out of the top 4. And Georgia then will have 2 losses on their ledger. And for Ole Miss, they'll certainly catapult themselves into the top 12 and be a part of the 12 teams that will qualify for making it to the postseason, which will start December 19th. So you have a lot of intriguing scenarios here with this selection committee and what they're going to do here from now to the end of the month and really into December, but more so as we get deeper into the month. And as far as the games are concerned this week, the only ones that you can really, truly look at, of course, Georgia at Ole Miss, which is 3:30. If Ole Miss can pull off the upset, like I mentioned, they'll put themselves in a position to where they're going to say, hey, we belong here, considering what we've done on the schedule so far in this 2024 season. And then Georgia will suffer their 2nd loss and out of the top 4, so that'll be huge. But we would think Georgia, even with Carson Beck, with the 3 interceptions in the first half against the Gators there on Saturday, but pulling it out. And that's why I think Georgia, they're going to be a tough out here. Now, if Beck even just plays good, they're going to be the team to beat. If he's going to have these moments where he's not going to play well, then they're going to get beat, despite the fact that Georgia's defense is stout. And you would think that they're going to at least be in the games based on their defense. But Beck is going to be the guy that's going to carry them deep and possibly to a championship. So let's see what they do against Ole Miss. Another game, I don't know if Michigan has it in them, but they're going to go to Indiana. And you talk about this being maybe an upset special game. I'm not going to go as far as that, but would I be surprised that throughout Saturday, and when I look at the score, that it's Michigan 20, Indiana 17, they're midway through the 4th quarter? Would I be shocked? I would not. But I would think Indiana will prevail. To me, the game against Ohio State is going to be the one. And let me see when that game is. That is actually after this game. It's the next game, but they're not going to play them until the Saturday before Thanksgiving. So they'll have a bye, which would be good for them. But hopefully they're not going to overlook Michigan. And I don't think they will, knowing that they have a bye, which they can regroup. But the game is in Columbus. So you're going to have to keep that in mind as far as the Hoosiers trying to see if they can pull off a big upset or at least be competitive in the game against Ohio State after them playing Michigan there on Saturday. And then, of course, Alabama, LSU at night. let's see what's going to happen here. Like I said, I think LSU is going to win the game. I really feel that Alabama on the road has had trouble, and with LSU knowing that, and same for Alabama, of course, you could talk about that as well, knowing that, hey, if they win this game, they're going to be in. But LSU is going to have that same thought process. And how I look at it is that because Alabama's had trouble at LSU over the years, usually when the game is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama wins. So I'm going to say LSU wins a close game and therefore will knock Alabama out of any contention there for the playoffs. And that's what happened there with the college football. We'll reconvene, talk about it there on Monday, and see where these teams will land as far as what the committee will choose come Tuesday night. But it's going to be intriguing, fascinating as how this is all going to play out here over the course of the next few weeks, heading into Thanksgiving and heading into the next month where you'll have the college championships. And therefore, after that, we'll finally have the first ever 12-team college football postseason. All right, now let me put on the high tops. As we get into the NBA, quite a few things have happened in the association here over the last few days, where the first one, I'll just talk about this, get it out of the way. Joel Embiid got suspended 3 games for his actions against that reporter. I talked about that on Monday, and the reporter was wrong. I get it. He was probably trying to fuel the fire of Embiid, knowing that he dedicated his career to not only his late brother, Arthur, but also his son, who also named Arthur, trying to say, well, hey, if you want to be great and dedicate your basketball life to them, well, you have to be healthy and on the court. Probably shouldn't have done that. In fact, he definitely shouldn't have done that. And I understand his angle in trying to get his point across, but obviously Embiid should have not have put his hands or have shoved Marcus Hayes, the columnist there for the Philadelphia Inquirer. So therefore he gets 3 games suspended, and it will only take into effect once he's cleared from his health issues, to where once he's able to be on the bench and suited up, well, he's not going to be able to play for 3 games. And right now they're on a West Coast swing where they played the Clippers last night and then they play the Lakers tomorrow. And speaking of that and the Sixers, Paul George and his return to LA, first time in that new building. If you haven't seen it, it is a spectacle beyond belief. To me, it's almost SoFi light because of the wall that they have there, which is behind the basket in the second half, where it's like a wall of seats that go straight up. You don't have any division. You don't have any type of walkway to get to those seats. It's almost as if that you have to get to your seats from the floor level and then go up. Now, how do you get to the upper deck? Upper deck, of course, they have it divided to where if you're going to be in that upper tank, I believe that there is a place where an exit that you just go to your seats and up straight. So there isn't really a level where you could just walk around behind that basket. And that's to get a home court advantage in the second half, where the opposing team shoots at that basket, where you have players on the free throw line and all the distractions, whatever, those squiggly things and signs and things of that nature. But for Paul George to go back and call the fans stupid while he got booed last night, fans are going to do that. Come on, Paul George. You play in Philadelphia. If you haven't gotten a taste of what the Philly fan is like, and you're going to be sensitive to the Laker fan booing you, and even though they had a video tribute for you, and one that, let's face it, what could you really take away from his, 4 or 5 year tenure as a Clipper? Sadly, the first thing that comes to mind in the bubble in a Game 7 against against Denver, taking 3-pointers from the side and hitting the side backboard. And I understand he has had his moments. Game 4 in Dallas last year where they were down 2-1, him and James Harden. But then the final 2 games, he was a no-show, typical Paul George. And I don't want to pick on him, but for him to get on the fans, he should just say, hey, all right, it was what it was. I know I was going to get some boos. I did get some cheers. I appreciate the fans, whatever, and that's it. So he's going to get booed from here to eternity. And not that he has another 10 years left in the league. What is he, 33, 34 years of age? But with that being said, the Sixers, they lose last night, and they are falling quickly there in the Eastern Conference. Granted, they're not whole, and I totally get that. But you had Paul George there go last night, and the Sixers now 1-6 at the bottom. Believe it or not, tied with the Bucks of all teams, as the Bucks have now lost 6 in a row. And I don't want to really talk about them, per se, but talk about two teams that we would expect to be near or at the top of the Eastern Conference right now are cellar dwellers in the East. So that's what you have there with the Sixers and Paul George and Joel Embiid. A suspension that was warranted on top of that. You got 3 games. I mean, not going to give him 5, not going to give him 1. So 3 I thought was just right. Elsewhere, last night you had the 2022 NBA Final rematch between the Warriors and Celtics. A good one where the Warriors on an East Coast trip or a road trip. I don't know, they're not playing all their games out East. I know they played in Washington prior to going to Boston. But for Golden State at 6-1, playing the Celtics at 7-1, Golden State had a big lead there, third quarter. Celtics then took a 7-point lead in the fourth quarter, and then the Warrior defense, and they made some big shots. And it's interesting, when you watch that team, the Warriors that is, and you see guys like Kyle Anderson, you see guys like Gary Payton, who's now come back to the fold there with the Warriors, but you see players that you don't even recognize. Obviously, no Klay Thompson. You see Draymond Green, of course, but it's a different look Warrior team, and even with them at 6-1, winning there last night, pulling away where Steph Curry almost had a triple-double. Big shot there. Buddy Hield, another guy brought in who made a dagger 3, which pretty much iced it for the Warriors. And the Celtics suffered their first home loss. And listen, no harm, no foul. The one thing I did think about, granted you can't go back to last year, but I was like, wait a minute, they beat this team by 52 last year. 140-88, and here they were, and a new-look team. And here they were, mano a mano down the stretch, but the Warriors prevail. Kudos to them as the Celtics coming back from that trip where they went to Charlotte back-to-back games as well as in Atlanta. So Celtics will regroup, no big whoop there. But it does mean with their loss and with the Cavaliers, I mean, what could you say about Cleveland? 9-0 to start their year. And it's funny, I know the other day I may have made a mention to their head coach, J.B. Bickerstaff. Remember, he got ousted. And that's a terrible job by me. So I want to call out Paul George or certain players, teams, etc. I got to call out yours truly. You know I'm all about being accountable and all about owning up to my transgressions or my decisions when it comes to the podcast or thought process, whatever. But for the head coach is Kenny Atkinson. J.B. Bickerstaff, what am I thinking? Got fired after last year, and to be honest with you, you shouldn't have got fired. They won a first-round series, albeit against a young Orlando team, and with them not having Donovan Mitchell and them not having Jared Allen, at least they did win a series against the Celtics in the second round. But for him to be kicked out and to bring in Kenny Atkinson, 9-0. What can you say about what the Cavaliers have done as they've gotten off to a tremendous start, and for them to be the only team standing in the NBA as far as with an undefeated record, because Oklahoma City lost the other day, and OKC was the other team that was undefeated in the NBA, but they lost, what was it, on Tuesday night to Denver. Actually, it was last night, excuse me. So for Cleveland, can this keep up? Could this be a team that will be near the top? I think they'll be near the top, but will they be a 1 seed when it's all said and done? We're only 9 games in. It's way too even early to get into that, to really massage that. So kudos to them. Give it up to what they've done, and let's see if that can continue. Because to me, I think they'll be one of those teams. I don't know if Philly, Milwaukee, if they could get out of their early season doldrums, because those are the 2 teams we expect to be at the top, as well as the Knicks for that matter. And the Knicks losing Atlanta yesterday. And I don't know, is it time to really put I don't want to say a bullseye, but to call out the Knicks here, 3-4, where they have a ton of expectations. And granted, it's only 7 games in, but I'm sure you don't like what you see there early on if you're a Knicks fan. But Cleveland, right now you got to wonder whether or not they're going to be a team that is one to take serious here. And I guess you have to say so early on in this NBA season. But other than that, that's what they've done there in the East. And speaking of Denver, I want to talk about them real quick, because Denver, I know the other day there was an article that came out about Nikola Jokic as far as him and his prime. And now that he's getting toward the back end, maybe he's right now on hole 10 on the back 9 of his prime there in Denver, where with a lot of personnel changes, and there has been some rumblings between the head coach and the front office as far as trying to keep their players, whether it was guys like Bruce Brown, even KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, among others, where they were unable to sign them and unable to keep them in the fold to be competitive. And as evidenced last year, as you saw them lose in the second round to the Minnesota Timberwolves after being down 0-2 in the series and then winning the next 3 games, but fizzling out there against the T-Wolves. And even with Jokic, Jokic is one of the most unassuming superstars that you could ever encounter. A guy that, to him, basketball is a job. Anything else is not important except just him being back home in Serbia or him just being with his family and living a quiet, humble life. And from that article, it didn't seem like there was any disconnect from Jokic to the coach or Jokic to the front office. Like I said, he's a guy that I'm just here to play basketball. I just hope that people will follow my lead as far as his work ethic and what he does behind the scenes quietly and not be a rah-rah guy or point fingers or not be a guy that's going to vociferously come out in that locker room and say, hey, we got to pick it up, guys. He is not that. But based on what I got from that article, it was just a thing where the Nuggets, they got their championship and fine, but now you have to wonder whether or not that they're even going to be in contention for a championship based on some of the players that they've lost here over the last couple of years. And then now Aaron Gordon is going to be out multiple weeks with a calf strain. And when you take a look at Jamal Murray, who's in concussion protocol, and he's been out, this is a team that has not been able to stay healthy. And we know it all centers around the big man. But if Murray's not going to be there to make big shots, or Aaron Gordon's not going to be there to fill the lane and contribute, or Michael Porter Jr., another one like Aaron Gordon, kind of floats in and out of these games, who knows if the Nuggets are going to have another championship run in them, considering that they have this core, they have that player. And I thought it was fascinating to have that assessed, to wonder whether or not Denver, if there are some rumblings there between the head coach and what he's trying to do to try to get this team back to a championship level. And granted, this is all way too early, and even with the Nuggets out of the gate very slow, Nuggets, even with them winning last night 5-3 and currently the 7th seed in the Western Conference, that's something maybe we'll have to keep in mind and pay attention to as we move along this NBA season. And then you also have, I'll say this real quick, Greg Popovich, thoughts, prayers go out to you, my guy. Mitch Johnson has now been the assistant coach as Popovich has had to leave with an illness. I don't know the extent of what the illness is like. Hopefully it's nothing too severe or nothing that's alarming to where he's going to miss a significant portion of the season. So again, we hope for a speedy recovery for the Hall of Fame coach. And Mitch Johnson, we'll see what he could do to kind of piece it together with Wembanyama, Chris Paul, etc. there. And let me see. Let's take a quick look at the NBA schedules. Anything to really look at as we wrap it up here with the NBA. Tonight, nothing there to discuss. Your big games, Phoenix at Dallas. Bucks are in New York against the Knicks. Philly to LA, as I talked about. Lakers are now lost, what was it? They started off 3-0, and now they're 1-4 in their last 5, and they had a tough road trip. And I know JJ Redick has gone on his players, other than LeBron, of course. LeBron put up a 39-point effort against Memphis, and I guess that rivalry will start to bud again, even though there's no Dylan Brooks. But for John Moran, who even came out and said that he doesn't like LA, the Lakers that is. So dating back to that whole scenario, remember postseason where Dylan Brooks tried to get into LeBron's head? Good luck with that. But then you had that Shannon Sharpe incident with the sideline with Brooks and barking at the Memphis players, and with now Morant coming out saying, I don't like them. So who knows? Let's see what's going to happen there as the Grizzlies just blew the doors off of LA there last night, and now the Lakers are 4-4. Other than that, you don't really have anything else over the weekend. Boston at Milwaukee there on Sunday, which would have been a game to watch, but nothing there. Golden State at OKC on Sunday, which I believe wraps up their road trip, because Golden State is in Cleveland there. Well, that should be a good game. Golden State at Cleveland tomorrow night. So, all right, you got some NBA games to chew on, but as we all know, it's a regular season that is laborious, it is long, and we're just getting warmed up and started as we're into the second month of the NBA season. And the same can be said for the NHL as I lace up my skates, and you've had, let me start here. It may be a little bit too early, or premature considering he still has a long season and 34 goals to get to surpass a one Wayne Gretzky. But I guess we could start considering this recent stretch for Alexander Ovechkin, scoring 6 goals in the last 5 games, including a goal last night, and give it up for the Capitals. They are now 9-3, and a surprise, if you ask me, there in the Eastern Conference and overall in the NHL. The ageless one, 39 years of age, still scoring goals at a healthy clip. 861 for his career, 34 behind surpassing Wayne Gretzky. And I would think, and I've said this before and I'll say it one last time, I want him to get it this year, but now I want him to get to 900. And I would love it that he ends the year at 900. An even number, and who knows, will he go out on that note considering that 900, or will he continue to come back next year and add to that? I mean, the guy, it's not as if he's hanging by a thread or he's on his last legs just trying to get this record. The guy is still performing at a top-notch level. And even Steven Stamkos, as they beat Nashville last night, he's even said, like, I can't believe this guy. This guy at his age, he's still productive. He's still a guy that you have to account for whenever it is that you're on the ice. It's not as if he's lumbering. It's not as if he's slowed down. Yes, a lot of miles in those skates and in those legs, but the guy's indestructible. And if you've seen him throughout the course of his career, he still plays at that fast, furious, high level. Maybe it's dialed back a little bit, but for Ovechkin, I can't say even more than what has already been said about his career, what he's done, and now being just 34 goals. And I guess I gotta have to start an Ovechkin watch as long as I'm doing this podcast. So with him getting the goal last night and the Capitals playing well, and that's even more important because the Capitals were miring somewhere at the bottom of the Metropolitan Division, or early to say as far as like any wild cards, trying to get one of those 2 seeds there. If they were a team that were mediocre or bad, it would kind of be like, all right, that's a record that, is it among the annals when it comes to the home run record of baseball or the Iron Man streak of baseball, or football doesn't really have that, doesn't have that cachet, doesn't have the allure when it comes to records being broken. I know baseball definitely has that more than anything, or if you want to say the point total record NBA that LeBron broke when he beat Kareem there, what was it, a couple years ago? Right, those are the records that we look at, and we look at with high esteem. Now with Ovechkin 34 goals away, still got a ways to go. It's not as if he's 5 away. It's not as if he's less than 10 away. But considering how he's played here in this recent stretch and what he's done, and now that he's past 860 goals, the next one will be 870, 880, and then next thing you know, he'll be at 890, just 4 goals away. Hopefully he does it this season. Hopefully he's healthy enough that he does it this season, because we don't want this to be prolonged into next season and so on and so forth, as I've said. But good for him as he tries to continue that assault on a record that I'm sure when Wayne Gretzky got to 894, pretty much when he surpassed Gordie Howe, I'm sure everybody, especially who follow hockey, think that, oh, there's no way that this record's going to get broken. And right now, Ovechkin, as we've seen, is threatening it. But you had a key player back in the NHL. I talked about this last Thursday, where Connor McDavid, who suffered a lower body injury, it was supposed to be, I guess, his ankle. You know how the NHL, it's either upper body, lower body. They don't want to reveal the extent of what the injury is. But came back last night, and of course the league needs that, against Vegas. Now, was in a loss, didn't register a point, was supposed to be a 2 to 3 week injury, and here it is 10 days later. He only missed 3 games, and he's back. And let's see how McDavid is going to do here as Edmonton. Some slow starts for them, and as they try to rise above that and get on track. So let's see how he does here in this early part of the season. And as far as other key injuries, Colorado, Cale Makar out with an undisclosed injury. Who knows how long he's going to be out, whether it's indefinite, whether it's day-to-day, a couple of weeks. That we'll have to see. Who knows how long? We know about Ross Colton. It was their leading goal scorer. He's going to be out. So Colorado, the Avalanche, should certainly have now suffered a couple of big injuries to their roster. So who knows how they're going to recover and bounce back as far as what they're going to do there out west. But besides that, you don't really have anything else, people, NHL. And again, with the NBA, NHL, these are seasons that are going to be long, and I know maybe more attention will be paid to once the NFL season and the Super Bowl is come and gone, because those will be the sports that we're certainly going to look at. And I know college basketball starting to now take into shape here. I know Georgetown won their first game, not that they're expected to do anything in the Big East, but beating Lehigh last night. But college basketball is now part of our consciousness, although I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to right now. And Cooper Flagg, of course, is going to be the story of college basketball this forthcoming season. They're the young prospect out of Duke. But with the NHL, Panthers continue to play well, as I talked about there on Monday. Hurricanes have now won 7 in a row, so look out for them as the Hurricanes try to see. Regular season, they've done well. Postseason is where they fizzle out. 2 years ago, I understand they made it to a conference final. They got swept by the Panthers, but they're a team that is a regular season bully, but in the postseason, and again, they don't have a superstar. Not that you need superstars per se, but they don't have a guy that if you're an opposing team, we got to stop this guy. And their goaltending with Frederik Andersen is not great. So even though Carolina's a team that you have to watch out for, but are they going to be serious come April, May, and June? I don't see it. So definitely got to throw some cold water on that. But 7 in a row, good for them. Jets, after 8-0, losing a game, they've won 4 in a row. They're 12-1. Vegas now 9-3-1, as they have done well. The Kings have also done well. As far as teams that have not, Nashville, as I mentioned, they were 0-5, and it looked like they were starting to get themselves back on track, but now 4-8-1. Colorado is 6-7, just throw that out there, considering their injuries. Other than that, that's it. Maple Leafs, Austin Matthews was out with an upper body injury. I don't know how long he's going to be out, and I believe they play Boston tonight. And I'll take a look at the schedule now, if there's anything juicy, anything worth watching here in the NHL this week. Nashville at Florida tonight, if you care. Philly at Tampa. NHL, listen, I get it. There's not going to be Pittsburgh at Washington Friday, and that's an ESPN game where you have the 2 old guard stars in a one, Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin. Who knows how many more of those matchups you're going to see. Vegas at Seattle. Saturday. Yeah, you don't really have much as I'm looking through it here. Edmonton and Vancouver. That's what you have at your NHL. And then I'll wrap it up with baseball. Hot stove getting a little interesting here, especially if you're the Yankees, because when Monday, as I discussed, you talk about players that opted out. A lot of the big pitchers opting out. Blake Snell, as well as Corbin Burns, of course, Gerrit Cole. And Cole had opted out. And, of course, with his agent being Scott Boras, it was a thing where the Yankees had first dibs to tack on another $36 million to his contract. So with him opting out, the Yankees could have honored him the extra year, which would have made his contract 5 years at $180 million. But as it was, the Yankees say, we're good. If you want to go out and test the waters, you can. And with the elbow injury coming into the season and him not having anything close to what he was the year before and winning an AL Cy Young Award, although he pitched good, but if you're making $36 million a year, you got to be more than good. So give it up for Brian Cashman and company for stonewalling Boras, and who knows, I'm sure Boras is probably looking at that and say, Gerrit, let's just take this deal. I got other clients I got to deal with, in particular Juan Soto, in particular Pete Alonso, and among others. But Cole decided, I want to stay put. So he's got 4 years, $144 million, didn't get the extra year. And listen, nobody needs to shed any tears for Gerrit Cole, as he has been paid handsomely in the first 5 years in a Yankee uniform, and he's going to get paid handsomely over the final 4. So that's what you have there. But to me, the more intriguing thing about that is, will that parlay to their negotiations and their discussions with Juan Soto? And now that we're past a week from the World Series, which ended a week ago yesterday, and how they're going to manage these negotiations, because with Scott Boras, and you know he's going to ask for every red cent. And how I look at it is, of course I'm not a Yankee fan, but if I was a Yankee fan, I would take the same stance that Brian Cashman did to Juan Soto. And I understand they don't want to poo-poo it. They don't want to just half-ass it. But I'm sure whatever discussions that have taken place to this point, and even Brian Cashman, as you heard on, I believe, Monday or Tuesday, said that he even talked to Pete Alonso. And I'm sure it's just kicking the tires just to kind of see, because they're going to need a first baseman as well. Anthony Rizzo out. He's not going to cover first base as he didn't in Game 5, as we saw. And not to say that the reason why he's not coming back because of that, but it's age. Rizzo's, 36 years of age, had a lot of injuries. No need or even way, shape, or form to bring him back. But if I'm Brian Cashman, I would not have a prolonged discussions with Scott Boras. I'm not going to wait with flowers and candy and stay there waiting with bated breath on whether or not Juan Soto is going to be a New York Yankee. I would just say, here's our plan. We're going to offer X for Y amount of years, and we need a decision by Z. Meaning that here's what we're going to lay out. 12 years at $600 million. And that's just a hypothetical. And we need to know by December 15th, because we have other positions that we need to fill. Other things that, based on our budget, that we're going to need to tend to. So by December 15th, if you don't have a decision or an answer, and I understand it could be some leverage. So if that means he comes back on December 15th where Steve Cohen says he's giving us 625, will you give us 630? All right, fine. Maybe they'll negotiate at that time. But this isn't going to be a thing that's going to go past Thanksgiving, which we would think, which may lead into Christmas, where the likelihood possibly, although strange things have happened. Shohei Ohtani got signed, I believe, December 7th on the last day of the winter meetings last year. But this thing should not go past Christmas. And if I'm the GM, I would say December 15th, that's it. And we're going to go elsewhere. So let's see. Will the tact that the Yankees took against Gerrit Cole, will that also parlay into the same process with Juan Soto? If you ask me, from what I've seen so far, I could easily say yes. But at the same time, I don't know. Because I can't say I trust Brian Cashman at this point, despite the fact he's been there over a quarter century as the GM of the New York Yankees. But who knows? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of back and forth between Boras and Cashman here. And who knows? Boras could be the master manipulator. And whether or not Brian Cashman and company are going to stick to their guns and say, or will the flirtation and will the batting of the eyes by the player and the agent is going to be enough for them to kind of be flexible? I don't know, but one more time, if that was me, if I'm Brian Cashman and go to my boss, Hal Steinbrenner, I said, what are we going to do here? And Hal's also got to stay put too. Collective effort, team effort, that's it. And of course they have to re-up on the manager, which you know they're going to do. But let's see. I am intrigued to see how that's going to play out, because we all know he's probably got a handful of suitors. Mets, you want to say the Dodgers for Juan Soto, Toronto, San Francisco, maybe the Cubs, Chicago. I don't know if there's going to be another team after that would even think to flirt with the idea. Seattle, who knows? But that's what you have there with baseball. Some smaller deals. I know that the Angels signed Kyle Hendricks, no big whoop there. Hendricks, the guy's a soft tossing right-hander, crafty guy, and the Angels need pitching in the worst way. I don't know how that's going to play out. A 1-year, $2 million deal, so obviously it was a pittance to pay Hendricks just for the 1 year. But the Angels, as we all know, they have a just bunch of issues that they need to have resolved, considering once Ohtani left and Rendon and his contract and Trout with his injuries and a rotation that they traded Griffin Canning to bring in Jorge Soler. That's just a mess out in Southern California. But baseball, next week, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Monday you'll have the announcements of all the awards. So that's Manager of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Cy Young, and MVP. To me, no big whoop. So I'm not going to get all geeked up unless you have an upset. Unless they give the NL MVP to Francisco Lindor, which in that case, you'll just say, wow, where did that come from? But we would think your MVPs are going to be Ohtani, Judge, Manager of the Year. Could be a toss-up. But at the end of the day, are you going to be just up in arms or just crazy to think that, wait a minute, how did Carlos Mendoza not get the Manager of the Year and Pat Murphy in Milwaukee did? Or how did not Matt Quatraro of the Kansas City Chiefs not get the Manager of the Year when Stephen Vogt did? Or how dare that the Cy Young in the AL was not Tarek Skubal or not Chris Sale? I mean, again, and the Rookie of the Year, same deal, where we think it's going to be Jackson Chourio in the NL, and in the AL, off the top of my head, I couldn't even tell you. That's how far removed I am from baseball. So that's what you're going to have there for next week. So with that being said, another podcast comes to a conclusion. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for just hearing what it is that I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars. Write a review on Apple, Spotify, the channel on YouTube, at JAYREELZ. Please, people, this is my full-time job. I'm trying to make a living doing this. I'm going to need a little bit of your assistance, your help, not even a little bit, as much as you possibly can. So take a screenshot, share with your family, friends, foes, frenemies on social media. It will go a long way into getting the word out. Word of mouth. Remember that, people? Before social media, before the internet, when you're trying to develop and build a business, come on, help a brother out. I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following: on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports since birth. And where else are you going to get all of these topics? NFL, college football, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, all in one podcast in roughly an hour, a little bit longer. Where else? That's why. Spread the word. Do what it is that you can to get this name, this podcast out there, because you know that every time I sit in front of this microphone and in front of this camera, I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, fury, energy with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything. That happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.